It took me years to realize that I was thinking about production and audio engineering all wrong. I kept chasing gear and plugins and overcomplicating things and wondered why my mixes and productions still felt off and amateur. What's up, y'all? Welcome to the channel. My name's Phillip. I'm a full-time audio engineer, producer, and musician. In this video, we're gonna go over 10 things that I wish I knew when I was first starting out as a beginning audio engineer and producer. Number 8 might not be one that you expect, so definitely stick around for that one. If you're new here, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. It really does help out the channel and allow me to make more content that hopefully is helpful to you. Lesson number 1, you don't need expensive gear to sound pro. I think every engineer, producer, and musician starting out kind of has this assumption that the nicer the gear that I have, the better off the records are gonna be. But what I've learned over time is gear and instruments, they're just tools. Some tools are better at certain things than others, but price isn't always the determining factor for that. Just to give a brief example of this, one of my studio staple microphones, one of my desert island pieces of gear, is the Shure SM57. The SM57 as a tool is a wildly rugged, versatile tool that can be used for so many different applications in the studio. I use it literally every single day, whether it's in the room, whether it's on drums, whether it's on guitar cabs, acoustic guitars, sometimes even vocals. The mic just works, and that mic is $100. In the environment of studios and audio equipment, that's an incredibly cheap piece of gear that is used so commonly in the audio engineering and production space. In fact, for certain applications, I far prefer the 57 over some of my much more expensive microphones in my locker. Gear obsession is incredibly common, but the reality is that a great engineer, musician, or producer can do a lot with a little. As someone who does this full time, I do thoroughly enjoy using high-end gear, expensive preamps, high-end tube microphones, nice instruments, so on and so on. But those pieces of gear aren't necessary for me to get a good sound. In an ideal world, you spend so much time building the foundation of your craft in editing and mixing, properly tracking and setting up your sources for recording, understanding signal flow and gain staging. All the expensive stuff is just the cherry on top when you have the capacity to acquire it, but it is not necessary for you to create a good sound. You could get away with just a 57, a Scarlett, or a Volt and a decent pair of headphones and make some amazing records that way. Number 2, room acoustics matter more than you think. This might be a hot take for some people, but it really shouldn't be. Before you spend $1 on expensive speakers and studio monitors, before you buy a $3,000 microphone and upgrade your preamps and get a nice new analog compressor, you should be focusing on treating your space. The way that sound moves in your room is 100% going to affect how it's captured in that room. So if you're dealing with standing waves and early reflections and bass buildup, you're already at a deficit in your recording process trying to capture the sound that you're looking for. Now, I know that room treatment, especially proper room treatment, can add up in price pretty quickly, but there are many different ways that you can acquire treatment for a very low price, especially if you're gonna be doing a lot of this yourself. DIY panels are not difficult to make, and they can be fairly cheap. And if you don't have the capacity or the resource to properly treat the space or DIY your own acoustic panels or bass traps, then I would get extremely creative with how you do treat the space or change your location when you're tracking and recording, and then you can come back into that space to execute your mix. This could be things like going into your bedroom, flipping the mattress up, putting thick curtains over the windows, making sure that you have a rug in the room that you're recording in, or even holding a heavy comforter over your head when you're recording vocals. I also want to briefly say that a dead room is not always the best room. There's certain scenarios where you want a little bit of liveliness and space in the room that just covering your wall and foam panels isn't going to offer you. In fact, it could be to the detriment of your sound. As I always say, do what's in your capacity to do, but be as strategic and intentional as possible with treating your environment. I also think a lot of early audio engineers and producers who can't treat their space properly just yet should start mixing on headphones. Invest in a quality pair of headphones, as studio monitors in an untreated space are most likely going to give you an inaccurate view of what you're tracking and what you're actually mixing, which is why you're going to notice a lot of discrepancies in your mix as you start to reference it on different platforms. Number 3, and this one kind of crosses the production and tracking engineer barrier, but learn to mix as you're producing. One of the most important lessons that I ever learned when I was working in studio and learning audio engineering was how to get things right at the source. I learned very early on how every single decision that I made affected the signal and affected the outcome of what we were tracking. Everything from which room we chose to track in, how it was treated, which instruments we chose, which mics we were using, and the proximity and angling of those microphones in regards to the source, how exactly the vocalist is singing and the musician is playing. All of these different factors combined gave us the outcome of the record. And 90% of the quality and vibe of that outcome was determined by those early decisions. Your priority, especially as an early engineer, should always be to fix it at the source. Your first steps in processing a vocal are who that vocal is, their tonal qualities, the mic that you choose, and their proximity to that mic. Becoming very well acquainted with those details will determine how you process going forward. If you're tracking electric guitar and you're miking a cab, exactly where you place that microphone on the speaker is going to make a very dramatic difference in the tonal qualities of the outcome. If you're tracking live drums, the mic that you use, the proximity of that mic to the drum, the angle, is it towards the rim? Is it towards the center? Are the drums tuned well? What are you doing to help control bleed and phase issues? How good is the drummer at the source of it at controlling dynamics and playing well? All of these concepts are vital parts of the mixing process long before you ever get to your compressors, preamps, your board, or your DAW. Number 4, and this is a simple one, but a really big one, learn how to really listen. One of the most important aspects of my early journey as a classically trained musician, as an engineer, and as a producer was ear training. Learning to perceive certain frequencies, changes in timing and pitch, being able to hear what's happening in the stereo field, understanding dynamics and dynamic range. Training my ear to be able to perceive these things in my early stages of being an audio engineer and a producer and a session musician was absolutely vital to not only my ability to fix problems as they showed up, but also my ability to execute certain visions that I had as a musician, as a producer, and as an audio engineer. No matter how great my environment is, or how expensive my gear is, or how much training I've had, if I can't hear the things that I'm targeting, whether to fix or positively to color and form a signal, then I'm not going to be able to really get the job done in a way that is replicable. One of the easiest ways that I've found to train this early on is to make extreme, very extreme changes to your signal and acknowledge the difference. What do these specific frequencies sound like when you attenuate or boost them like crazy? What happens when you absolutely crush a bass with a compressor at a 20-to-1 ratio and make adjustments to the attack and release? What sound changes do you notice? What happens when you place a vocalist 1 inch from the diaphragm of the microphone versus 12 inches from the diaphragm of the microphone? Completely drench a signal with hall reverb or ping pong delay and then pull back and notice and acknowledge the differences in the signal and how it fits in a mix. All of these different things give you a broad understanding of what is happening to your signal when you make these sweeping changes. It also gives you a spectrum to process from bypassed to 100%. If you never train your ear to know when something sounds or feels good or bad, you'll never know how to either replicate those great things in the future or fix those problems and target them. Number 5, keep your signal chain simple. I think when you're first starting out as an engineer or producer or musician, you want to use all of the tools that you have at your disposal. You just got a DAW, you have all of these plugins, maybe you got the Waves pack and you've got another 300 plugins at your disposal. There's a tendency to want to use all of the knowledge that you've just acquired and all of the tools that you've just gained to shape your sound and start mixing and producing. And I know this kind of ties into lesson number 3, but I have found it incredibly beneficial to get all of the things that I possibly can right from the source and do minimal processing to that signal in order to get as transparent and accurate a mix as possible. Now, that's a very general statement with a lot of nuance to it. Now, obviously, there's sometimes where my goal is a completely colored and crushed and just completely destroyed signal that needs a lot in order to make that happen. But my main point is that if I get the source right, if I make sure that my settings on the guitar amp are exactly what I want them to be, and I've chosen strategically the pedals that I'm going to use, and I have mixed them and adjusted them to be exactly what I want this guitar to sound like, I really don't have to do a whole lot in the DAW in order to make this a cohesive record. It might just be controlling dynamics with a compressor. It might be carving space for this instrument in the mix with EQ and positioning it with panning, but I'm not having to use 12 different plugins to color and shape that signal in a way that I didn't at the source. Now, obviously, there's nothing wrong with using a lot of plugins. Sometimes that's just what the source calls for, and that's just what we want the outcome to be. But I think specifically early on in your engineering and production journey, it can become a crutch for you. And if you don't understand deeply what's happening through all of those different plugins and how it's affecting the source and how those changes are affecting the outcome, it can be very difficult to keep track of issues that you're having, and every next plugin just becomes a fix for a previous issue in the chain. I have found that 1, fixing it at the source, and 2, keeping your chain as simple as possible when you're starting out allows you to really understand the fundamental qualities of the plugins that you're using and the processing that you're using, and mitigates you falling down rabbit holes of processing issues and plugin issues that you don't have a lot of the knowledge to fix yet. One of the things that my audio engineer instructor taught me when I was working in studio early on that I'm so grateful for now is he would constantly ask me why I was doing something. That test has kept me sharp to this day. We'd be building a vocal chain for an artist coming in later that day, and I'd add another EQ to the vocal chain, and he would ask me, why did you add that EQ? And I would have to figure out, was I doing something subtractive? Was I doing this for color? Was I gonna boost the high end? He didn't want me to just add plugins because I've seen vocal chains with plugins on them. And so I need 2 compressors and 2 EQs and a preamp emulation and auto-tune and a reverb, right? A de-esser, saturation, I need a multiband compressor, right? All these things we tend to add because we've seen it exist out there, and we followed some YouTube videos and we followed some templates from someone on TikTok or Instagram or whatever it may be, but they're not necessarily there because our source actually needs that level of processing. Every source, every room, every mic, every instrument and tool that you're using is different in its own way. Process in a way that makes sense for the exact setup that you have and work out from there. If you can simply understand the foundational elements of gain staging, panning and positioning, EQ and compression, and beyond that ambiance, your reverbs and delays, you can create an incredible sound with just understanding those principles alone, where you don't need a lot of other fluff around it. Like I said previously, there's times where I have 10 plugins on something because it's just what the signal requires, but more often than not, I am doing my very best to keep things pointed and intentional and as simple and cohesive as possible for the record. Number 6, and this one might be a little bit controversial, as I've seen many other videos from audio engineers and producers saying the exact opposite of what I'm about to say. So let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with what I'm about to say. But try your very best to not use presets. In my personal opinion, it is absolutely a crutch early on to get into the cage of using presets and then making minor adjustments on your mixes, especially when you are first starting out. People talk about how it's a great way to get started and get a decent sound fast, and that very well may be true in some circumstances, but I also think that it's the fastest way for you to not understand the effect those changes are having on your signal and on your overall mix. In this, I'm not talking about creating a sound within a plugin and saving that as a preset for you to easily recall later. I'm talking about opening an EQ plugin and going to female rock vocal 2. This may very well get you close to the sound that you're looking for a little bit faster, but it also cuts through the entire process of you learning to adjust these different frequencies in order to find the tone and the color that you're looking for. It cuts out all of the mistakes that you're going to make, and it cuts out the process, like we talked about very early on in this video, of training your ear to hear all of those different stages of the process and train it to hear the adjustments that you are manually making to get to the result that you're looking for. Cutting out that ear training and that manual part of the process within any plugin is going to limit and hinder your experience down the road when you're in any other environment than your own or with familiar plugins that you know and love. If you are going to use presets in your EQ or compression, I highly recommend that you pull up that preset and bring it back down to 0 and practice replicating that tone and sound so that you can do it yourself through any plugin that you use. Once again, there's no greater gift as an engineer or producer than understanding the nuances of the signal that you're affecting and how your processing is going to affect your final outcome. Number 7, don't be afraid to reference. I think one of the traps that I fell into as an audio engineer and definitely as a producer as well early on was once I went through so much training. So I did 2.5 years in a private mentorship at a studio and was working in live sound a bit as well at the time. I've been a classically trained musician since I was 6 years old. So living in that space and having so much training, you kind of think that you should know how everything's supposed to sound, especially early on when you're 18, 19, 20 years old. And I've gotten all this training. I'm like, now I know how to make drums sound great. Now I know how to mix a great vocal. And I step out of that environment into the real world, taking on real clients and mixing for people and producing for clients and doing session work. And I realized that there was still a lot of distance between the polish of what was out there and, very successful for some people and, really successful records and what I was executing. And the thing that really helped me kind of come back into reality was consistently referencing my work against the greats, consistently testing my mix against pop radio, writing a guitar solo for a client, and then listening to a guitar solo in a great rock record. And I realized really quickly, and it was very humbling, that there was still a lot of time that I needed in order to mature my skills. There was a lot of nuance that I didn't understand yet because it hadn't been put in practice over the long term that I needed to know in order to really polish the things that I was doing. Referencing for me has never been about copying the processing of another record. It's been about just being an active reminder of what is perceived as high quality and polished and cohesive, and what does a great pop vocal sound like when it's settled into a mix? What does it really sound like to have tight, aggressive, low end with a ton of body without getting muddy and maintaining your clarity? What does that sound like when someone has been paid thousands of dollars to do it maybe? And what does that sound like in my own record? And how can I adjust what I'm doing in order to mirror some of that? It's a good constant reminder to go back and reference what it sounds like to hear a complete polished product and how you can try to emulate some of those same results without copying what they're doing. So early on, it was really helpful for me to be mixing an R&B vocal for a client and reference some great R&B songs in order to really listen for, and again, going back to ear training, train my ear in what it sounded like to have a forward, compressed, present vocal that sat at the top of the mix but wasn't overly shimmery and overly brittle and tinny. And what did that look like? What did that sound like? How could I emulate that with my use of compression and saturation and proper de-essing if needed? And I found that over time I was able to train my ear to more quickly operate in that space in my own mixes and my own production. I started to train the way that I tracked synths and guitars and the way that I came up with melodies based on these references of what was working in other people's records. All right, number 8, and this is an interesting one. This is one that I really don't hear a lot of people talking about, yet it has kind of become the cornerstone of my music business. And it's this point. Once you have established baseline foundational skills as an audio engineer and a producer and a musician, once you have the core things down and you're pretty good at what you do, you will be hired far more for your taste than for your skill. I'm gonna say it again. I've gotten so many more clients because of my taste, because of the specific stylistic decisions that I make than I have ever gotten because I was the best EQer or knew more about parallel saturation than someone else. Once you have a foundational, nuanced understanding of the basic aspects of mixing and production and musicianship and knowing your instrument, you will get far more clientele, more work, more pay at a higher level, having distinct taste in your music and the processes that you go through than anything else. And this is why the first 7 lessons of this whole thing are so important, is the more that you understand all of the other broad subjects that we're talking about, of understanding your signal and processing and plugins and your proximities and your source, all of those different things, the more that you understand the nuances of that, the more you can actually shape a sound and a tone and a color and a texture that people come to you for. So much of the business that I've I've built as an audio engineer and a producer has been because people like the specific decisions that I make on their music. It could be a way that I always splice up their outro with something a little bit unique. It could be a way that I process background vocals. It could be the way that I specifically approach mixing and processing their vocals that no one else has done for them before in the past. This stylistic confidence and attention to detail that I offer the clients that come my way with their music is the reason why I've been able to build this business at all. It hasn't been because I'm the fastest with quick keys or I'm a pro with Melodyne and I understand compression better than anyone, or I have a Grammy or Billboard charts. It's simply been because they specifically like the way I treat their records. So my advice to anyone starting out in this space or this industry would be to build that foundation, make it rock solid so you really do understand the nuances of what you're doing, and then build creatively from there, building a sound that you truly do love and enjoy and can replicate over time. Number 9, and this one ties into number 8 beautifully, don't chase trends, chase identity. More often than not, when you're first starting out, you're going to be copying a lot of things that are around you as you learn to build your sound, you learn to express yourself authentically as someone who's working at that craft. But what I see a lot of times, especially with producers and musicians, is strictly chasing the trend instead of creating in a way that feels really specific and authentic to that person. I think what happens with this oftentimes is you become kind of diluted as a producer and as a musician. Yes, you're a bit of a chameleon, but you've also kind of lost your own personal identity in any of the projects that you work on. There's a reason why Metro Boomin is Metro Boomin. There's a reason why Jack Antonoff is Jack Antonoff. They have an identity to their sound that is recognizable when an artist gets on their music. Of course, they operate in many different genres and styles and hundreds, if not thousands of different artists at this point, but there's still a kind of soul identity that operates within their music that is recognizable. Using myself as an example for a moment, I love the 80s. I love retro synthwave, dark wave. I love Depeche Mode, Tears for Fears, stuff like that. I obviously have a lot of analog synths and some more on the other side of the room that you can't see. I love that space. And by default, every production that I work on carries that same identity. So if I'm working on a synthwave record, we're all in on synthwave, let's go. But if I'm working on a trap beat for a rap artist, there's still gonna be some of that analog 80s synth identity that makes its way into that sound design because that's who I am. And that's what feels authentic and natural to me. And that's honestly why that artist has come to me for that production. If they wanted another beat from someone else, they could go with someone else, but they came to me specifically for my stylistic identity and the way that I choose sound design and build sounds in the studio. This has been so true for me, obviously, when it comes to synths and things of that nature, but your quirks are also your superpower. So if you are an incredible vocalist as a producer as well, creating your own vocal samples and that being a specific identity within your music, if you randomly play like oboe or flute or cello, having that as a part of your identity within your production structure is something that's going to be incredibly unique to you that no one else is going to have. They might have to sample for it or go to Splice or go to Cymatics, but you have the ability to create your own samples and parts whenever you want to, and that's a superpower. If you got a super echoey, crazy sounding bathroom in your home or in your building or something, mic it up and use that in all of your records. Find the quirks around you and the quirks about the way that you go about your process and use them as a way to form your identity stylistically as a producer, musician, and of course, as an engineer as well. Finally, number 10, and this one might seem obvious to some, but I do think that it's worth saying, you're never finished learning. I have now worked as a professional audio engineer and producer for the last 13 plus years, and one of the constants in this world of engineering and production and the music industry is that it's ever changing and that the learning never stops. Especially with technology moving so fast, with AI right here in front of us, things are ever evolving, constantly morphing, and consistently changing. The last thing you want to do is be stuck in your ways, never gaining new experiences, never trying anything fresh or exciting or new, never challenging yourself stylistically and creatively, always doing the exact same setup, same processes, never learning new tips and tricks that can help you be more efficient and polished as an engineer or producer, as a musician, making sure you're still working at your craft, practicing scales and rudiments. Watch videos, get on forums, take courses, take classes. Your goal should be to be better at what you do every single day and every single project that you take on. When I got out of training in the studio, it was literally the starting line for me. Of course, I learned some incredibly foundational things there. It was so important for me, and I could not be more grateful that I had the opportunity to do that, but it really was just the starting line. So much of what I learned happened far after that time in my life. And there is absolutely no better way to learn and grow in your craft, no matter what it is that you do, than doing that thing. All of the schools and classes and courses and videos are all great, but you need to play your instrument, you need to mix a record, you need to produce for someone or for yourself in order to garner the skills and understand the language around what you do. Nothing beats the experience of operating in your craft at scale. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this helped shave off a couple years of trial and error for you. Drop a comment and let me know which one of these hit the hardest, or if there's something that you wish you knew when you were first getting started. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more deep dive content like this, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.